Echoes of Wisdom is the very first Zelda game. Oh sure, we've had games in the Legend of Zelda series, one or two over the past 30 years of course, but we've never had the opportunity to play as the eponymous princess. It's something that the community has been clamoring for since the release of, Wind Waker? Being introduced to Tetra, the sassy pirate that becomes the princess of the whole kingdom, that made me want to play as Zelda. And after every subsequent release, I found myself wishing to jump into the perspective of the princess to get something new. A fresh perspective on Hyrule, the histories, and the Legend of Zelda. There was so much princess potential bubbling under the surface. The characterization of Zelda in the stories of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom made it seem like the series was building up to a game with her as the protagonist. I personally thought Tears of the Kingdom was the place for that, but we'll get to that in the review series before too long. But it was not to be, until Echoes of Wisdom. Echoes of Wisdom is the first Zelda game. And whatever it is I wanted in the first Zelda game, Echoes of Wisdom didn't give it to me. Look, Echoes of Wisdom is a fabulous game. Truly, it's one of the best top-down games in the Legend of Zelda series, and while it's probably not pushing Game of the Year for myself personally or the industry at large, don't let that distract you from the fact that Echoes of Wisdom is a great game. But for being the first ever Zelda game, it leaves a lot to be desired. Spoilers for the entirety of Echoes of Wisdom are ahead, as well as spoilers for these other games. We're going in depth for this review, so be warned. If you haven't played this game, there are lots of moments of genuine delight and discovery on which you do not want to be spoiled. If you like top-down Zelda, 2D exploration, or experimentation for the joy of it, you should play this game first. Don't worry, I'll be here when you're done. For the rest of us, let's get started. I'm Volcaronite, and here's my review of The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. By the way, if you want to support more content like this, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm always cooking up something good if you like thoughtful reviews and video essays on your favorite video games. Get subscribed so you don't miss them. I think the best place to start this Echoes of Wisdom review is the look and feel of it, because this game is just about the most adorable game in the Zelda franchise. I mean, really, have you seen this game? Have you heard the Deku Scrubs arguing about who plays hide and seek better? Have you helped the two chiefs of the Zora settle their arguments and come together to put on a little concert? Have you put on Zelda's cat costume and literally talked to all of the cats in the world who love to tell you about their person friends and who love to get little belly scratches? This game is too gosh darn cute. There's a lot of reasons for this, but the art style absolutely plays into it. This isn't the first time we've seen this sort of clay toy art style. We had the same one 5 years ago in the Link's Awakening remake. People were unhappy with the choice to remake that game in this style, and I remember not being particularly fond of it myself. The game was surreal and contemplative, but this art style made it feel lighthearted and jovial. The two messages clashed. I've softened on the style since its release, but before playing Echoes of Wisdom, I probably still would have called it a mistake. Now though, I can see the art style for what it is, an honest-to-goodness telling of a legend. This game is a story that's almost been lost to time. Link, the protagonist, the main character of the series, is trapped. So, the princess has to save him. The damsel in distress becomes the damsel of destruction on her path to save her family, allies, and kingdom. And this story is a retelling, using little clay pieces to demonstrate what happened, perhaps with a little artistic license, as it goes with many of the oral legends in our world. Did Zelda actually look like a little chibi cutie? No, but for this retelling of the story, this is what we have, and I think it's really clever. With that in mind, let's judge the art style not in comparison to the rest of the series or industry, but just on its own merits. And in that way, this game looks positively phenomenal. It's not just reusing the assets of the Link's Awakening remake, the world has been redesigned to fit the style, and the designers absolutely nailed it. From the characters and towns to the animals and water, everything just looks so adorable and complete. If you look closely, you'll see some small issues. A lack of anti-aliasing can give things a sort of jagged edge, and the game occasionally drops frames. I'll say that this was not a big issue for me, but others have had it much worse. But taking a step back, this game just looks amazing. My one major critique is the blur effect that they gave to the edges of the screen. I remember disliking this in Link's Awakening too. But here, Echoes of Wisdom often has a lot more focus on the depth and height differences. So the blur is supposed to evoke a kind of shallow depth of field effect that you might see on a still camera taking a picture. It might be technically impressive, but to my eye, it just looks bad. It means that large portions of the screen are out of focus and unusable. And because you're often climbing cliffs or hills, there's always going to be lots of the screen that's blurry. It's genuinely something I wish I could turn off. The designers were trying to add to the toy retelling aspect with this, but it's the only part of the art that takes away from the immersion and reminds me that I'm staring at this world through a screen. That's it though. The rest of this game looks fantastic. Each region is uniquely beautiful. My favorites were Elden Volcano and the Faron Rainforest, along with the Still World, but everywhere just looks great. Characters are expressive and fun, movement is smooth. Holy roly coly, thank you Nintendo for making jump a feature of the character and not an item I have to equip, and it overall feels like a joy to play. Except for the echoes. Alright, for anyone who watches my videos regularly, you knew this was gonna come up. I'm getting it out of the way now so that we can move on with the rest of the game. But the echo system is my single least favorite part of the game, by far. Not the mechanics of it or the interactions with the world, but the controls. Let's briefly go over what echoes are and how they work. Throughout the game, you'll often see objects with these glowy triangle particles coming off of them. These are items that you can echo. You walk up to them, learn them with a button press, and you can place them anywhere in the world that you like afterwards. You can also echo enemies. You have to kill them first, then you learn them from a little drop. The mechanics and balance of the system are actually pretty clever. Your little fairy dude, Tri, has a number of echo charges floating behind them at all times. I called these triangles, but with a space between them because I'm hilarious. Every echo requires a certain amount of these triangles to summon. Most of the stuff you find early on costs only 1, and Tri starts off with 3. So you can summon 3 things at a time. If you try to summon more, echoes in the world are deleted in the order of oldest to newest. This is great, it works out really well, and it provides a huge incentive to upgrade Tri. We'll get to exactly how that's done later in the video, but Tri can get up to 6 triangles, which also happens to be the cost of the most expensive echo in the game. You also get a discount on most enemy echoes as you upgrade Tri, which has a similar effect to getting more triangles. It all works out great, except for the menu. This menu sucks. Every time you learn an echo, it gets added to this list. You have an encyclopedia log that you can use to peruse your echoes, and you get this hot swappable list of every echo you've ever learned. And it's awful. You learn well over 100 echoes throughout the game, and every time you have to swap between them, you need to scroll through this list. So many of the things you learn are either things that you'll never want to use, or strict upgrades, or highly situational. Every player will have a handful of echoes that they use all the time. For me, this was a handful of different blocks for climbing around the world, the flying tile across gaps, a couple of enemies, a bed to heal. 8 to 10 major echoes that end up buried in your list. And you don't have direct control over your list. Instead, you can sort your list in 5 ways. You can sort by most recently learned, most recently used, triangle cost, a vague category, or by most often used. I ended up using the last of those since it was the closest to what I would have wanted, but if I ever needed to use a unique echo, or one I'd never used before, then I'd have to spend 15 or 20 seconds scrolling through the list to find it. I even had moments where I'd learn a new important echo and spend a minute or so mindlessly summoning it over and over to bump up its usage stats and get it closer to the beginning of the list. I'm not going to harp on about this and instead give you my suggestions to fix it. To do this, let's take a look at Animal Crossing. You have a wheel of 8 favorite tools that you can program however you like and select by holding down a button and circling around with your joystick. In addition, you can swap between them in order by using the D-pad without having to open a menu. It's a great system. Bring it over to Echoes of Wisdom. It's really that easy. There's a bunch of buttons on your controller that aren't used by the game or are dedicated to niche features, so let's use them. Move Sword Fighter form to L3 or pressing in on the left control stick. Make up on the D-pad open up a wheel of programmable favorites. This doesn't have to be locked to 8, I feel like you could have as many as 12 and still be very usable. Left and right on the D-pad scroll around the wheel. You can make down on the D-pad a single turbo favorite echo. Automatons don't need their own button, they can just be sorted in with your echoes list. And if you need the big lists, bind that to holding L1, the left bumper. Give us one more list that we can arrange however we want. Nintendo could add this into the game tomorrow if they wanted, and it would make echoes so much easier to use. Look, I know this isn't a big deal for a lot of players, but it really did impact my enjoyment of this core game system enough that it'll reflect in the grade I give this game. In climactic boss fights and clever puzzles, I often had to spend 20 seconds scrolling through these lists, searching for a specific echo that I knew I had, but just couldn't find. It took away from the momentum of the game. Alright, that's it for the look and feel. They're my favorite and least favorite parts of this game, respectively. And if I'm being this petty about the control and menu schemes, it must be that the rest of the game is pretty freaking great. Spoiler alert, the rest of the game is pretty freaking great. Let's move on to the gameplay and mechanics, because that's what this game is all about. But first, a word of advice. About a third the way through the game, you're going to get an accessory called the Frog Ring. Accessories are equipable tools that you can wear to give you certain buffs. There's accessories that make it more likely for you to find resources, healing hearts, or rupees. You can swim faster, walk through quicksand, take less damage, all that sort of thing. But along the required path, you're going to find the Frog Ring. When you find it, put it on. Never take it off. Here's why. Most of the actual gameplay of this game is either exploring the world or crawling through dungeons. All of this is great. The world feels pretty big without being overwhelming, areas feel distinct, and movement is smooth. As I stated earlier, you have jump as a part of your core moveset from the beginning of the game. This may seem quaint to people who aren't super familiar with the Zelda series, but in most games, Link can't jump. Some games give you Rock's Feather, which is an equipable tool that allows Link to jump. Some simply automate it so that whenever Link walks off an edge, he'll jump automatically. The two most recent 3D Zelda games give Link a button that allows him to jump, but this wasn't included in Link's Awakening, so I was afraid it would be missing in Echoes of Wisdom. Rest assured, it's here. But your jump is pretty weak. The world is mostly made up of a whole bunch of square tiles. You can see it in slopes and cliffs as well as your echoes. Zelda's jump is about 1 tile in length, but half a tile in height. And let me tell you, you'll notice that quickly. Much of the game involves you building up a staircase with a few echoes to get over ledges, and only being able to jump up half a tile means that your staircases can't go up very high. The Frog Ring means that you can jump a whole tile up and 2 across. It's difficult to describe just how widely this opens up your moveset, so put it on, never take it off, and enjoy the game. With that out of the way, we can talk about the rest of exploration, which feels awesome. Zelda has a full range of movement, it's not locked to 8 directions, along with the jump, a spin move, and her echoes. Most of the game is spent walking or riding around the world, finding things that interest you. You can follow the minimap, which isn't toggleable, grumble grumble, but you never have to, and I rarely did. I found that walking around the world was just a ton of fun. You might feel a little slow at first. I felt this way and found myself spinning all across the world, since it increases your speed a little bit. But before too long, you can stumble upon Hyrule Ranch and get yourself a horse. And look at how cute they are. These are significantly faster than walking, and you'll eventually get an echo that allows you to call your own personal horse wherever you are. Your navigation is guided by your echoes. The world is filled with all sorts of rivers and cliffs and forests and buildings that you'll need help to get over or around. Luckily, everything in the game can be used for navigation. Those walls of trees that are code for an invisible wall you can't pass in most games, climb on top of them. A river without a bridge, build one yourself, or just swim across. A high cliff that you can't scale, use a strantula to spawn a rope that you can climb up. It's all led by you. This game design is clearly informed by Tears of the Kingdom. Instead of the predetermined linear paths of yore, you can use the tools available to you to build your way around the world. The echoes are kind of like Ultra Hand, except I think that Echoes of Wisdom's Echoes system is better than Ultra Hand. That's right, I think this game does creative problem solving best. The Ultra Hand system is definitely cooler and more varied, to be sure. It's got a big focus on building machines and vehicles, but this kind of thing really encourages players to, if not skip over content, but at least breeze through it in one particular way. It's much more sandboxy. With Echoes, your tools are more limited, but that encourages you to take your time to inspect your surroundings and environment to solve problems, rather than to just fly over them. Here's an example from early in the game. You're in this little side view 2D section, and you have to scale over a big boulder. You still only have 3 triangles, and you can't make a staircase to get over it conventionally. But if you place the boulder just right, you can use the different elevations in the ground to build your way across. Is it a little silly that you're building bridges out of old beds? Probably, but the effect it has on your world is so cool. This puzzle also uses your other major ability, Bind. Bind is a bit closer to Ultra Hand, just without the building. Basically, you can latch onto nearby objects or enemies and move them around. The object will stay in its position relative to Zelda when she grabbed it, unless you used walls or ceilings or other objects to push it around. It's incredibly useful all throughout the game. You can also choose to follow an object by holding down your right bumper button. This causes you to use your object's movement as your own. This is certainly less useful overall, but there are some clever puzzles that use it, like this one with underwater jets. As a supplement to the ecosystem in puzzles, Bind is pretty cool. Your enemy echoes are a little less cool, which brings us to the combat of the game. See, Zelda doesn't typically have a way to fight enemies in the world. You get your sword fighter form early in the game, and that is a depletable resource that allows you to assume the controls of Link from the tutorial. You start with your sword, eventually unlock a bow, and towards the end of the game, you'll get bombs. As you go through the game, you'll find a group of collectibles called Might Crystals, which can be used to upgrade your sword fighter form. It can be upgraded to last longer, do more damage, or get more moves with each of the 3 weapon types. Sword fighter form is the best way that combat is handled throughout the game, but it's a very limited resource. Replenishing it isn't the easiest thing in the world to do either, so you'll be in situations where you need to fight but can't do it yourself. This is where your enemy echoes come in. Enemy echoes have the same basic moveset and health as they did when you killed them. Some are grounded, some fly. Some have melee attacks, some use projectiles. You'll experiment throughout the game and find the ones that appeal to you the most. Early on, I used the Carmadillo for most fights. Once I cleared the Gerudo dungeon, I switched to using Boroblins and Lizalfos, depending on the environment. Finally, by the end of the game, I was pretty much exclusively using the Lynel for all fights. By leaving most of the combat to your echoes, the game pretty much makes you feel like it outsourced the system for you. You don't have much to do with combat in the game. It's instead just about summoning enemies to fight for you, standing out of their way, and replacing them as they die. It's not great. Your healing also kind of sucks. Basically, it's a simplified version of the healing from Breath of the Wild. You'll find ingredients throughout the world that you can eat raw for a small amount of health. Or you can bring them to any one of these smoothie stands that dot the world to cook them into useful smoothies that both drastically increase their healing capacity and give you a bunch of different buffs, like climbing faster or being fireproof. But to use any of these, you pause the game, go into your inventory, and eat the items for free. I talked about this system in my Tears of the Kingdom combat review, but for those that didn't watch, I hate it. In my opinion, pausing your game should never be a solution to a mechanic. Maybe I shouldn't be so hard on combat. I've been playing and thoroughly enjoying a lot of action games with really intense combat lately, but Echoes of Wisdom isn't really an action game. So I should put those games out of my mind and meet combat in Echoes of Wisdom halfway. The best fights are against bosses that are more like a puzzle to solve. The Goma at the end of the Farron Temple is a great example of this. The dungeon before it uses these crystals, which you have to activate by having an enemy with electricity attack them. The Goma has 3 of these crystals on its body. I found myself dodging its attacks quickly and getting into position to use electric keys to attack each one, before using the sword fighter form to deal damage during its stagger. I treated the boss like a puzzle and used those skills with my echoes for a more rewarding fight. The focus on echoes as puzzle-solving tools is intensified in the many dungeony places throughout the world. There's a lot of places in this world that encourage you to think they're a dungeon, but I'd say that you have 6 major dungeons, 6 minor dungeons, 2 of which are mandatory, and dozens of shrine-like micro-dungeons throughout the world. Most of these dungeons are good. A couple of them are great, one of them is awful. All of the major dungeons and most of the minor dungeons take place in the Still World. We'll talk about the plot relevance of the Still World in a bit, but these places are temples that don't necessarily follow the physics of the rest of the game. Objects and people are floating in limbo, the music is a little eerie. Each dungeon has a lead-up section where you have to navigate across some floating islands, using your echoes to slay enemies and build paths to get to a main dungeon entrance. These lead-ups tend to be pretty short, but they're a fun change of pace before the main course. The best major dungeon in the game, as far as I'm concerned, is the Farron Temple we talked about a moment ago. This one has a number of unique and clever mechanics at play. Most of the dungeon has you chasing down the boss key, which has been devoured by this huge bulb plant with a bunch of piranha plant mouths. To find it, you have to navigate through these rooms that require you to balance and weigh down platforms, find clever ways to hit switches simultaneously, like electric crystals in a short time, learn to control the rain, and navigate through darkness. It's a meaty dungeon that took me well over an hour to complete, and the Goma boss at the end was a clever fight. I really enjoyed this one. My other favorite dungeon was the Lanayru Temple. Navigating around while using this orb to toggle rooms between melting and freezing was so clever. It reminds me of that quest in Breath of the Wild where you have to carry the ice cube through the desert to make that one Gerudo lady a drink, but this temple is much more fleshed out than that. The boss fight against Scorchill was also really fun, since it combined a light puzzle with combat in the same sort of way as the Goma. If it weren't for the fight against the big slime mini-boss halfway through, which was the worst fight in the game, this would have been my favorite. The last good dungeons I want to talk about have the most clever integration of your ecosystem in the whole game, and they're the two minor dungeons of the Eastern Temple and the Hidden Faron Ruins. These two dungeons involve these lightning slime creatures that crawl around the walls. Your goal is always to guide them into a specified cube by building a path to it with your echoes. This idea was so much fun that I genuinely wish there was a whole minigame dedicated to this, or if there was a version of Dampé's Dungeon Creator from Link's Awakening that could let you build your own puzzles. With different elements and room layouts, it could have been a really awesome level builder. Even without that though, these minor dungeons were so much fun. They both have the same boss that iterates on this mechanic, but just makes it more challenging. It was fantastic. For my least favorite dungeon, that honor goes to the Jabul Ruins. This was the very first major dungeon I completed, and it's guaranteed to be one of the first two. The main problem with it is that it's not especially puzzle focused, it's combat focused. And because Zelda doesn't fight, you're relying on echoes. This is really early in the game, so your sword fighter form won't be leveled up very high, and you probably won't have many enemy echoes at all, never mind those that can swim, which means that you'll die. A lot. I swear to Gudra, this one room almost made me quit the game, and no, I'm not exaggerating. It was just a nightmarishly frustrating slog, and the boss of Vocavor wasn't any better. But that dungeon was an anomaly. Apart from the Jabul Ruins, the dungeons vary from fine to pretty darn great. Here's how I rank all of the major and minor dungeons. Finally, let's talk about the micro-dungeons throughout the world. This is something that's definitely learned from the school of Breath of the Wild. Caves and small buildings that are just a few rooms of puzzles that lead you to a minor reward. They're basically shrines. There aren't 120 of them or anything, it's much closer to a couple dozen, but these are a wonderful change of pace because they encourage you to drop into puzzly thinking at a moment's notice. These can have rewards that range from a few smoothie ingredients to rupees to heart pieces and accessories. They come in two basic types. The first is just places in the world. You'll stumble onto a cave or staircase or ladder that leads you to a short navigation puzzle. These tend to have a fair bit of variety, but are usually all about a single puzzle concept. Here's a fun one to the east of the River Zora village. You'll have a box floating around a swirling lake and a button behind bars that you can't press. Your goal is to move the box onto the button with bind. It starts simple, but has 3 rooms that get a little trickier each time. These aren't ever really challenging, and they can't really iterate on ideas since they can be tackled in any order, but they do have some fun concepts. My favorite of these was this one, just to the east of Kakariko village. You can climb through it pretty easily and get the first prize, but you'll see a heart piece locked in the corner of the room. You can't get to it, but you do see this soft dirt on the floor beneath the heart piece. Early on in the game, you gain the echo for a hole mill, which can dig through this dirt and make a hole for you to fall into, but it only works for dirt in the ground, and this dirt is on the ceiling above you. What you have to do is notice that there's a patch of dirt outside the room, just above it. It's in view of the entrance, waiting for you to see it. This combines the echoes with that creative problem solving to give you a puzzle that wouldn't work in any other Zelda game. The other basic type of the shrine-esque micro-dungeon is the Still World mini-dungeons. These are easily visible on the map as big purple splotches of oogly boogly. You stumble upon and enter them, and you're suddenly in the Still World. These all have the same goal. You need to find these dark oogly boogly orbs that are trapping some of Tri's friends. You'll always be told at the beginning how many of these orbs there are. Some are guarded by enemies, some are being blocked by objects, and some are just floating there, waiting for you to build a path over and find them. Though I love the atmosphere of the Still World, this kind of challenge tends to be less varied and, for me, less good. They all kind of blend together. Also, these all have the same rewards. You get a couple of might crystals to upgrade your sword fighter form, and Tri gets a little bit of experience. That experience is incredibly useful, since it's the only way Tri can be upgraded. You'll want more triangles and cheaper echoes, so these mini Still World dungeons are probably more materially valuable than the places in the world, but I am really glad that these exist at all. Overall, if we ignore the implementation of the echoes list, the mechanics and gameplay of this game are pretty outstanding. Yeah, combat isn't great, but it isn't really the point of this game. It's all about using echoes to creatively navigate the world and solve problems. And to that end, this game is immensely successful. Zelda stories usually stink. It's a disappointing truth. Most of the main campaign plots of the Legend of Zelda games are pretty mediocre. Oh sure, there's a couple of compelling characters, and the themes of these games can resonate greatly with players. It's awesome to see how fans can link the timeline together, piecing details across games and decades together. But I don't really care about the timeline, and for the individual games, these major plots tend to range from fine to non-existent to nonsense. I probably like the story of Link's Awakening best in the series. It's something of a slow burn. Link is caught in a storm and crashes onto the odd Isle of Koholint. Link searches for a way off the island, but in so doing, explores and grows attached to the island and its residents, particularly to his savior, Marin. Meanwhile, he's slowly going through the world and unlocking the tools to wake a giant windfish, rumored to be the only way to escape the island. As Link eventually learns, the whole island exists only in the dreams of the windfish. To escape the dream and wake up, Link must reluctantly wake the windfish, ending the very existence of the island, the people, and the journey he took. It's a tale that is as joyful as it is sorrowful, and even 30 years after it was first told, it still holds up. Majora's Mask has to be up there too. After saving the world, Link is trapped in Clocktown, where he quickly learns that an apocalypse is coming. The moon is coming to crash onto the town in 3 days, unless Link stops it. So, Link has to do everything he can to learn what's happening, why the moon is coming, and what he can do to send it back. Of course, he fails because you can't stop the moon in a weekend, only to be sent 3 days back. He's trapped in this time loop purgatory, forced to relive the same 3 days over and over again, making a little more progress and learning a little more each time before he can finally save the world again. All the while, he's traipsing through town after town of desperate, depressed people who range from hysterical to nihilistic about their incoming demise. It's a dark tale of failure, death, and revenge. So, what do these stories have in common? Well, they buck the trends of the Zelda franchise. Neither story features the titular princess and overarching villain in anything other than cameos. They mess with the formula of the series in interesting ways to tell stories that tend darker than the rest of the franchise normally lives. When these stories aren't saddled with the rigmarole of their precedents and tropes and history of the series, they can get human and powerful. Compare these stories to that of Breath of the Wild. In many ways, it's a lot like Majora's Mask, at least on the surface. An apocalyptic disaster is coming for Hyrule, has come for Hyrule before, and Link failed last time. It's coming around again, and Link is on his own to stop it. Except we're in Hyrule, saving Zelda, fighting Ganon, which means that we need to spend time establishing all of the regular characters and archetypes. Perhaps doing this was fun and meaningful for the first few games, but by the time of Breath of the Wild, it was very rote. I know who Impa is, I know who Zelda is, I know who Ganon is. It's all familiar. Combine that with the pretty minor characterization overall, silent protagonist, and non-linearity, and you get a story that is scarcely relevant and almost non-existent. I know it resonated with some people more, but I gave the story an F in my review. So what does this tell us? Well, we can create a story triforce showing us the 3 things that I want in my Zelda stories. I'm looking for a story that breaks traditions, that gets a little dark, and is willing to give us strong characterization. Does Echoes of Wisdom give us this? Kind of. The worst possible decision was made writing this story with Zelda as the main character. The fanbase wanted a game starring Zelda in large part because of her characterization throughout the series. Link, being a silent protagonist, never got much in the way of character. He's just a guy, a dedicated, mute, violent lunatic in service of a monarchy. But Zelda, with her writing and personality and plot relevance, she's a character. Zelda fans wanted to play as a character in these stories. And Echoes of Wisdom gave us Zelda, the silent protagonist. This one choice means that for all intents and purposes, we didn't really get a Zelda game. We got another game with the same silent protagonist trope. All of the Zelda characterization that we wanted to see firsthand isn't here. Instead, we get another silent servant of the kingdom serving a monarch. Except instead of that monarch being the namesake of the series, it's just our dad. Zelda doesn't go through any changes or growth. She's who Link would be in this situation. This isn't really conjecture. Most of the game is spent either trying to save Link or wandering around while Link is also in the world doing his thing. This is kind of funny, actually. There's several moments when Zelda will approach other characters about Link and they'll say something like, "Oh yeah, Link's the best, hope he's doing okay, but he's just doing what he does, all's good." Stoic heroism is his only character trait, even when he's not the star. But here, in Echoes of Wisdom, stoic heroism is Zelda's only trait. It's almost like this entire game was made with Link as the protagonist, but then they swapped Zelda in at the last minute so that this could be a Zelda game. I don't actually believe that this happened, but if a designer came out and said that the decision to make Zelda the protagonist of this game came weeks before its announcement, I wouldn't be surprised. There's a stretch of this game that brings this fact into absurd focus. There's a dungeon at the end of the game where you have to relinquish Link's sword back to him, and the two of you complete it together. It's the last challenge of the game. There's no turning back, so you're making it to the end. It's not a long dungeon, but it's the pinnacle of your journey, and neither Link nor Zelda speaks a single word to the other for the whole thing. Link awkwardly nods to Zelda after each room is complete. He even makes eye contact through a solid wall at one point. It'd be hilarious if it weren't so disappointing. But okay, let's put that aside and look at the rest of the story. The first time you boot up the game, you don't even get a menu. It's a cold open playing as a fully powered up Link crawling through some dungeon or another. You have all of your hearts and tools, so you easily stomp your way up to a big blue Ganon, as well as Zelda trapped in a crystal. Link fights Ganon, but upon seeming to defeat him, a big purple hole of oogly boogly opens up and swallows him. In a last-ditch effort to save the princess, Link fires an arrow at the crystal, cracking it. Zelda breaks out and you take over, playing as her. The oogly boogly starts growing, so you have to sprint in a big chase sequence out of the dungeon. As it turns out, Hyrule is being ravaged by oogly boogly. It's emerging all around the kingdom and sucking people and places inside. Once you're safely back in Castletown, you're summoned to the king's throne to talk about the issue. Suddenly, oogly boogly sprouts from the throne and swallows up the king and two of his advisors. Except this time, evil doppelgangers emerge from the oogly boogly. The fake king tells the guards that Zelda is causing the oogly boogly and orders her locked up. While in prison, Zelda meets the sprightly Tri, who does all the talking for Zelda. Tri teaches Zelda how to use the Echo ability and reckons that the fake king is probably an Echo. Zelda escapes in a stealth section, meets up with her personal caretaker Impa, goes in disguise, and sets out into the world to cure the oogly boogly and save the king. Upon arriving at some ruins, you learn that you can enter the oogly boogly at certain points to gain access to the still world. This is the game's dungeons, but it's also this kind of eerie place where the land from the world is all cracked and twisted. Time doesn't really move in here. The landscape is fractured in all sorts of weird ways, and any people or creatures who were swallowed up are floating, motionless. In this first Still World dungeon, you encounter the guy who saved you, Link. Except this is evil Link, who tries to attack you. You defeat him and nab his sword, which you're allowed to use in short bursts. You finish up, saving other Tri-sprites, and eventually slay a boss and cure the oogly boogly, resetting this section of the world and freeing the trapped people. From here, you're dumped into the world and have some freedom in the order to tackle these problems. You start with two, one in the Gerudo Desert, one in Jabul Waters. In both of these, you have to solve a local conflict to prove your strength and gain access to the Still World entry points. The Gerudo are, of course, a proud tribe of warrior women, so you have to prove your strength and purpose by helping them solve some small issues and curing a smaller section of oogly boogly. In Jabul Waters, the two tribes of the Zora are led by chiefs who are angry at each other for not complimenting their music enough. So you work to save them from some smaller issues, team up with them to take out the Echo of Jabu Jabu, enter the worst dungeon in the game, and cure this region as well. With these two places sorted, you return to Castletown and enter the Still World there to save the king and castle, which you do while also running into Link again. This time though, it's real Link, who gets grabbed by some dark, misty hand and dragged deeper into the oogly boogly. Now, your mission is to save Link and to take out the figure that grabbed him. You get 3 more regions to cure. In the Elden Volcano, you have to help the bookish new chief fill his father's shoes and save all of Goron City, all the while proving himself. In the Hebra Mountains, you help the friendly Yeti Condi learn what happened to his brother and home. In the Faron Rainforest, the Deku scrubs there actually like the oogly boogly, since the spiders coming from it shoot cotton candy, so you have to work against them to cure the region and help them realize it was for the best. All the while, these dungeons put you in contact with the goddesses that created this world. They give your enemy a name, Null. Finally, once this is all done, you corner Null. You save Link, return his sword to him, and fight Null together. The world is saved, the oogly boogly is gone, the end. I'll come out and say that this story is okay. On a Triforce of good Zelda story goals, it really only fails one. It's too tropey. I would say it succeeds in characterization. Zelda isn't characterized at all, but this is made up for with the rest of the writing and characters. This success shines brightest whenever you step off the path of the plot and interact with the rest of the world. The Deku Scrubs of Scrubton definitely have some of the best writing. You have to work against them to cure the Oogly Boogly, which they all love because of the cotton candy. There's a bunch of absurdist humor, and these Deku Scrubs are obsessed with this stuff that's, on the face of it, disgusting. There's a bit just before you enter the main dungeon in the Cotton Candy Club called the Sweet Spot, where a group of 5 Dekus are eating all the cotton candy they can grab, when the Oogly Boogly expands and swallows 3 of them up. One of the 2 left asks for help, but the other is silent. So the one who wants to help angrily asks the other, which is more important, your friends or cotton candy? And the other stares back blankly. Okay, I didn't do a great job of retelling it, but it actually had me laughing out loud. Another fantastic choice for flavor and fun is the cat suit. As a part of the main quest to scale Eldin Volcano, you have to get through Kakariko Village at the foot of the mountain. But there's a village elder there who's lost his cat, so asks you to find it. Thing is, there's cats everywhere. Most homes across the kingdom have a cat. Zelda has a cat. So in order to find this guy's cat, you have to trade for a cat suit, which lets you talk to them. And here you see how the world really works. These cats are all the lazing nobles, wandering as they please and letting the people do their bidding. Every cat in the game has something to say, and the first time I saw a cat refer to its owner as a person friend, my Cudo meter went into overload. This game is bursting with charm and creativity in its writing. Characters are filled with humor and insight that add to your journey in the game. On this scale, Echoes of Wisdom is one of the best written Zelda games ever. The people in the world are so clever and fun that, for the first time since Majora's Mask, I wanted to be talking to the NPCs. I wanted to hunt down every cute little kitty to see what they had to say, not because it was relevant to the plot or game, but because I wanted to. Finally, on our story Triforce, this game does try to get a little dark at times. The ceiling of how dreary the game can be is really low, given the art style and colorful nature of the world, but there are definitely times when you feel it. When Condi, the lonely little yeti living alone in the mountains, explains that his father is dead and that his brother has been exploring for a long time, I felt a real emotion. And even after defeating the boss that looks like his brother and curing the region, his brother doesn't come home. It's nothing incredible, but it definitely makes you feel something. It can be a little spooky in the still world too. Again, the heights of this aren't super high, but seeing characters frozen in fear, oogly boogly dripping off of their suspended bodies, it's a little off-putting. It's most effective when it's a character you already know, like your father the king or an ally that helped you. Alright, so zooming out to look at our story Triforce, I'd say Echoes of Wisdom gets points for characterization and darker themes while missing the part on avoiding tropes. But hey, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. My main hope is that, if we ever get another Zelda game starring Zelda, it can actually feature the character of Zelda, rather than just another silent cardboard cutout at the center of the screen. If you can believe it, there's actually quite a bit of this game that I haven't even touched on. There's dozens of side quests given to you by the many NPCs. Most of them are fetch quests, but let me tell you, when the kitty outside Seaside Village asked for a smoothie for their person friend, the Cudo meter for this game exploded. There's tons of minigames too, like this horse race at Hyrule Ranch, or the wild appearances of Stamp Guy, who just loves stamps and wants you to go to his stamp stands. You collect accessories and outfits that give you little buffs and benefits throughout the game. Oh, and did I mention the Slumber Dojo, where you can re-challenge bosses and get some exclusive accessories and gear? Echoes of Wisdom is so dense with things to do and find. There's so much here to keep you busy. The game's not exactly long. I'd say the main campaign is somewhere between 10 and 15 hours, with 100% completion hovering at around 25. It's got a lot of completionist collectible focus too, with a big encyclopedia of your echoes and side quests for you to peruse whenever you like. I'm not kidding when I tell you that this video could have been twice as long as it is. Suffice it to say that Echoes of Wisdom is a great game. I wish it were a more Zelda game, being the first ever official game in the series to star the princess, but I'm glad that her first game was a good one. She deserved it, and we're here to enjoy it. I give The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom a B+. It's a phenomenal experience that's a must-play for all fans of the Zelda series. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss my uploads. And check out my Tears of the Kingdom review series. It's another great Zelda game, and I go deep into critique and analysis in those videos. If you love Zelda games, you should check it out. But that's all I've got for you today, so enjoy your day and take care.